Hello Year 11 and welcome to your next geography lesson. From today onwards, we are going to be moving on to our final topic, looking at natural hazards. Now this is the final topic which makes up paper 1, living with the physical environment. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at what natural hazards are and looking at the different categories of natural hazards. And then further on in the week, we're looking at the distribution of volcanoes and earthquakes. The purpose of this recording is to go through the tasks step by step in a little bit more detail with a geographical input. So you might want to pause this video and work with the tasks alongside the video. So for example, when I finish talking about task 1, you might want to complete task 1, and then when you move on to task 2, you might want to start to play the video again. Okay. So, in this lesson, we need to know what a natural hazard is and what its definition is, because this actually came up in a previous exam. We need to know a range of different natural hazards and the different categories of natural hazards, and understand the factors affecting hazard risk. So task 1 then, what is a natural hazard? Well, a natural hazard is a hazard that threatens people or has a potential to cause damage, destruction and death. So the damage could be the impact it has on the economy, on job losses, on how much it costs to rebuild the economy. It might be the destruction that it has on buildings, on hospitals, on infrastructure, on ecosystems. It might be that the death toll is significantly high because of the damage that it had on infrastructure. Now, when we think about natural hazards, and we covered this in year 9, there are quite a few. So things that are caused by tectonic movement, we've got things like earthquakes, and earthquakes can also be responsible for tsunamis. Other types of natural hazards we have include volcanoes, and that also as a result of tectonic hazards. And then we have hazards that are also caused by atmospheric conditions. So we have things like hurricanes. Now, hurricanes have different names depending on where they happen in the world. So they can also be called typhoons, cyclones, as some examples, or also tropical storms. We also have other things like forest fires, and we've seen a lot of those occurring in Australia recently. Droughts, so when there's a very limited amount of rainfall. And then there's other things like landslides and lightning, for example. Okay, so we're going to look at all of these through this topic and look at why they happened, what were the causes for them, what were the impacts, and how they responded. Okay, now I'm moving on to task 2. So task 2, we need to identify the 3 different types of natural hazards. And we can see on this image that we have one example here, atmospheric hazards. We've got our second one here, geological hazards, and our third hazard is a little bit more vague. That's to do with flooding, which is probably the one that we're most familiar with here in the northeast. So atmospheric hazards are created in the atmosphere by the weather. So they're all to do with the weather. And not every part of the world has atmospheric hazards or the same atmospheric hazards. So for example, things like hurricanes, they only happen near the equator and just north and south of the equator because the ocean temperatures need to be a certain level or a certain temperature, sorry. Droughts might only occur in areas where they have very limited rainfall, and that ties into our information about high pressure. And then rain is the opposite of the drought. That is areas that have very low pressure, so they have a significant amount of rainfall. Geological hazards then are a little bit different. They aren't really based on your location in relation to the equator, but they're based on your relation to tectonic plates. And we're actually going to look at tectonic plates in the next lesson. So tectonic plates, the Earth is made up of lots of different plates, and they move through convection currents, and as a result they create things like landslides, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis. And then the final one is flooding. Okay, so now we're going to move on to look at task 3. So what factors lead to an increase in the number of people at risk from a natural hazard? Now, it's very obvious that whenever you learn about a hazard, that not everywhere experiences the same impact. So for example, an area that has a significant amount of money will maybe feel less of the impact than an area that has less money and therefore is less developed. An area that has more people within it, so if it happened in a city in comparison to the countryside, then the impacts are going to be different. So we need to look at these things. So the magnitude is looking at the size of it. So what did it fall on as the Richter scale, or how fast were the wind speeds travelling? Natural factors might be to do with its location, it might be to do with rock type, it might be to do with the relief. The frequency is how often. So how often do they occur? Because if you live in an area that has hazards every few months, then you're more likely to be at risk than areas that have natural hazards very randomly. The population density is looking at how many people per square kilometre. So generally, if there's more people per square kilometre, you're going to have generally higher amounts of death rates or injuries because there's more people that have been affected. The level of development is tying into our HICs and our LICs and our NEEs. And the population distribution is kind of ties into population density. So if it happened in the countryside, for example, to a rural area, then the population density is going to be less. Whereas if it happened in an urban area, the population is going to be more dense and thus the impacts are going to be worse. So once you've annotated your key with that information, I would like you to go through and categorize these statements under the correct example. So I'm going to just do one with you together. So I'm just going to pick a random one. High income countries are generally much better at preparing and responding to natural hazards. So this links into the levels of development. And it's tying into the fact that HICs generally have, they're able to prepare because their buildings are probably much stronger. They have preparation and systems in place that will tell them that that's going to happen, so warning systems, and then they'll have money to be able to respond to it. So the preparation, the responding, and also the warning are all going to be better. Now, once you've done that, we're going to move on to task 4. So task 4 is the last task for this lesson, so you need to show me what you know. So there's 5 different statements and you need to develop them using your knowledge from the lesson. And we're going to do the first example together. So places built on softer rock. So this is this relates to the natural factors. So places built on softer rock will experience more damage from a natural hazard because, well, if the rock is softer, it means it's more vulnerable, it's more susceptible to being damaged. So it's more likely to shake because the ground is more likely to shake, which as a result will cause the buildings or the infrastructure above to collapse. So the relief and the actual type of rock beneath the ground can have an impact on what happens above. So infrastructure is more likely to collapse because the ground beneath it is going to shake more rigorously. Number 2 then, a large magnitude earthquake will cause more damage because, well, remember that the magnitude is talking about the size. So if the size of the earthquake is more powerful, it means that the ground will vibrate at a more intense speed or more powerful. So as a result, the earthquake will be stronger, which will result in larger vibrations and this will then damage the infrastructure above. Now, if the infrastructure is damaged, that could then lead to more injuries, more death rates. It could also mean that major buildings like hospitals could be destroyed, so then the responses are going to be much worse. So, once you have completed all of these tasks, you will notice that on the It's Learning page under your work for today's lesson, there is an assessment. Can you please make sure that you upload all of your notes into that assessment, and then in the next lesson, there will be another video and other tasks that you should work through. Hopefully this video is helpful, but if you have any questions during the lesson, please make sure you send me a message. Thank you and good luck.